Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome to another ship fitting guide for Eve Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the third industrial ship that was added as the May 25 industrial update, the Noctis. Now the Noctis is a very unique vessel in Eve Echoes in that it's the first industrial ship that is neither a hauler nor a mining vessel, or at least not mining in the strictest sense, though I suppose you could argue that one of its primary uses is still to collect what will ultimately become minerals, but hey, we'll talk about that more later on. Now the Noctis in itself, I think, has confused a lot of people. I think we've seen a lot of folks go out and buy a Noctis on launch because it's quite a cheap ship. This has caused a spike in the auto-salvager price costs for the modules, and I think a lot of folks are going to ultimately end up selling a Noctis when they realise this isn't exactly what they thought it was going to be, and it's only a very niche use ship. Now, as you can see, I am on the live server here. I do own 3 Noctises, and they are fitted in different ways, shapes, and forms that I'll be showcasing in this video to do different things. I've got 2 primary different fits I use, one that I call a Locust, one that I call a Vulture, and we'll discuss those later in the fitting section. Ultimately though, I think this is the kind of ship that fits my playstyle really well and does a lot of the things I want it to do, and so that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. What is the purpose of the Noctis? Should you be flying this? If it's a ship you're on the fence about, hopefully this will give you a bit more sort of buyer intuition to know whether or not this is going to be useful for you, and it might sort of give you the push to say, actually, yeah, this is a ship that I'd really like to fly. So, hopefully this video will help you, and if it does, please hit like on it, subscribe if you haven't already, you know the drill by now. Of course, if you want to go the extra mile to help keep this channel going, you can find me on Patreon, where you can pledge to support there for as little as $1 a month. Pledging can earn all kinds of cool things like exclusive merchandise, stickers, t-shirts, and even a really cool and comfy hoodie, and you get your name in the credits at the end of every video too. Beyond that as well, I do have a Redbubble merchandise store where you can buy some really cool swag there. Anyway, with all that said and done then, let's jump right in to talking about the Noctis. Like the majority of the industrial ships, you can find the Noctis under the Ore ship tree. It's on the cruiser-sized branch up at tech level 8. Here it is, so let's tap on Learn More to, well, learn more. Now, I really like the look of the Noctis, I'll be completely honest. I like the profile that this ship has, I like its silhouette, I like how sort of blocky and angular it is. It looks like an industrial vessel. I also really like the standard colour scheme they've got here. The black and yellow is reminiscent of the other ore vessels, but it swaps out the blue for this deep sort of claret red, and I am all here for that. I really like that. There are no skins or nanocores here for the Noctis just yet, though. If we look at the attributes and fittings, first of all, the fitting profile, we've got 2 high slots, which are largely going to be left empty, 5 mid slots, which is an awful lot, most of which are, of course, going to be the auto-salvager modules, but we'll talk about that later, and 4 low slots, which gives us a good amount of versatility there as well. 3 combat rigs and 3 engineering rigs wraps this out. Of course, it's a Tech 8 ship. Most Tech 8 ships have 3 and 3. Our power grid as well is nothing to be sniffed at here. 500 megawatts may not be humongous, but considering the size of most of the modules that we're going to be wanting to fit to the Noctis, and the fact that we're not going to worry about high slots for the most part, this does actually give us a little bit of room to play around with, as we'll see later in the fitting section. Now, the cargo hold capacity is one of the problems, I think, with the Noctis, and it's something that I'm hoping will be patched in future and updated. Now, the Noctis is not supposed to be a hauler by any stretch. This isn't supposed to be right up there with, like, the Wreath or the Badger or any of those ships at all, but I do think that 2,400 cubic meters is a little bit low, especially once you consider that one of the main uses for this is going to be salvaging things like fleet rally points. It's going to fill that up ridiculously quickly due to the size of the capital tier loot. I honestly, when you compare this to the fact that, say, the Probe Explorer starts off with a basic cargo hold of 1,500 cubic meters, that's only 900 cubic meters less than the Noctis. I do really feel that this should be a lot larger than it actually is, probably closer to 4, if not even 5,000 cubic meters before the upgrades. It's not as bad as it would look, because we do get some changes in the trait description, as we'll see later. You can get to about 10,000 cubic meters at full training of skills and with cargo hold rigs, but to me, that's just not quite sufficient enough for what the Noctis is supposed to be, and hopefully by the time you're watching this at some point in the future, they will have changed that. Now, the defense of the Noctis, again, is fairly standard. This is a cruiser-sized Tech 8 vessel. We've got most of the hit points here are in structure, secondarily in shield, just like the other mining barges, the Vulture series and things like that. That's how these ships tend to work. And ultimately, it's not terrible. 13,693 is not terrible defenses. This is not a combat ship by any stretch. And if we skip down a little bit further to things like our signature radius, our flight velocity, our mass and our inertia, you'll see that this is very typical of an industrial ship. It's quite large on the signature radius compared to other cruisers of this tech level. It has a very low flight velocity of only 174 meters per second, alongside a pretty high mass and a low inertia modifier, so this does actually result in quite a cumbersome, heavy, slow-moving vessel. Now, to talk about the capacitor here for a moment, I've had a few people message me now saying, what with the Noctis having no real use for its high slots, what with it being primarily an industrial vessel that's going to pick the battlefield clean, could you perhaps use this like as a logistics vessel, using remote shield boosters or remote armor repairers? Now, the answer in short is no. That capacitor bank of 2,200 gigajoules and a maximum capacitor recharge rate of 10.54 gigajoules per second is atrocious. With no bonuses to remote shield boosters or remote armor repairers, with nothing to help stabilize that capacitor, you'll run dry in literally a matter of moments, like about a minute and a half to 2 minutes. You would honestly get better usage out of using something like a Burst 2 or a Navitas 2 to heal a fleet than you would a Noctis that's been fit for logistics. Ultimately, I think some people will try it, and if it's just you need a tiny little poke from a logistics vessel from time to time, then yeah, the Noctis could do that, and that's a genuine use, I suppose, for its high slots. But for an actual situation, I would rather just bring a logistics vessel, swap around, and then bring the Noctis out afterwards. But we'll talk about uses later. Under the trait description, first of all, roll bonuses, a 90% reduction to jump fatigue duration. And some folks have said, hang on a second, this doesn't have a jump drive, why on earth would it have this? Well, there are two reasons for that. Jump fatigue duration reductions can be useful if you were to have a Golden Age nanocore, which has the Sun Chaser engine system, which does act kind of like a pseudo jump drive. It would have a reduction to that, and if they do ever add jump bridges, which is where someone uses a jump drive and then they open basically they open up a little gate that lets other ships through after them. That again does have jump fatigue duration, so there is the possibility that this might be a stat that has been left on for those reasons. It may also just be a hangover from the Noctis just kind of being handed stats, but we'll see. +2 warp stability. Of course, it's an industrial vessel, which means it's going to be ever so slightly harder to pin down. In fairness, though, the Noctis is not the kind of thing you really see go into aggressive enemy territory. Chances of it being pinned down, fairly low anyway, but it does mean that if someone does try to pin you down, you've got a little bit more chance of escaping, I guess. Followed by a 50% increase to Auto Salvager optimal range, and we'll talk more about the Auto Salvager skills in a moment, but here you'll notice they get an additional 50% range. Then if we're training into Expert Industrial Ship Defense, you'll get an additional 5% shield. 25% shield at full training is not to be sneezed at. That makes the pretty good shields already that we've seen there of about 3,715. You're looking at another almost 1,000 hit points just from that skill bonus there. Obviously, industrial ship defense is going to increase the size of your shields anyway, because that's what the skill already does, but having that additional 25% shields on top does actually give it some pretty nice shielding. The 10% cargo hold capacity is ultimately a 50% cargo hold capacity at full training. That's another 1,200 on top of the 2,400, giving us 3,600, which again, you see my point here, it's not huge. You are going to need those cargo hold rigs on here, and I just think that this should be a lot bigger, an awful lot bigger. Like, I genuinely think that at least a plus 100%, that's a plus 20% per level, if not a plus 25 or even 30% per level, to make that cargo hold something truly useful. But there we go. Again, I might have something going on here that I think it should be this way. The developers think it should be a different way. I have given feedback. We will see what comes of it. Secondly then, Expert Industrial Ship Command. This is probably the biggest skill that you're going to want to train into early on. This gives a 5% reduction to auto-salvager activation time, 25% faster cycling auto-salvagers, and a 10% increase to their optimal range. Again, another 50% there at full training, meaning the Noctis will double the optimal range of any auto-salvager module that has been fitted to it. Now, this is the key thing about this, because anyone who's got a remote interest in salvaging can tell you that the salvaging technology skill chips are absolutely insanely bonkers difficult to get at the moment. They will cost you anywhere in the region. At the time of me making this video, I saw a set yesterday that if you were to buy the full set, so basic, advanced, and expert, would set you back around about 14 billion ISK. Now the simple point is, with the Noctis, you don't need that. You're already going to be doubling the optimal range of your auto-salvagers as it is, and whilst that skill can be beneficial, it's really not needed. So let's just jump into that skill very quickly to showcase what I mean. So I've actually even got to remember where this hides under here. I think it's under industrial technology. I have a feeling it's even actually under mining. There it is, auto salvage technology. Now what this does is reduces the capacitor need and the optimal range of those auto salvagers, giving a full at 100% training. If you went all the way to expert level 5, I think it's 100% additional optimal range. So that's 200% optimal range onto the auto salvagers if you have this skill maximized and you're using the Noctis. The thing is, you don't really need that much. That is just an insane amount of range on an auto-salvager. The auto-salvage technology skill, yeah, I'll agree this is useful if you want to be, like, training this to use auto-salvagers on any standard ship. For example, if you're using a brawling battleship and you want to have a couple of auto-salvagers in there to help just scoop everything up as you go, then that's a useful skill. On the Noctis, however, it is not necessary, and you'll see this as we move into the fitting section. The first fit that I want to showcase for the Noctis is what I would refer to as the Locust fit, and this is reminiscent of the fact that fleets of salvagers back in EVE Online are referred to as Locust fleets, picking a battlefield clean of all the stuff that's on it. Ultimately, this is designed for if you and your friends are doing Tech 10 content in nullsec, for example, and you need someone to scoop up the loot. The concept is that the player with the battleships and that go in first, once they are all targeted, then the Noctis will warp in and immediately activate its cloak, because nothing will be locking it, so it can just sit there cloaked. Not a covert ops cloak, because the Noctis can't fit those, so it can't warp cloaked, but it can cloak once it's in, as long as nothing's targeting it. Now the basic concept here is that then you sit in that anomaly with your friends. Obviously you're going to get some bounty ticks as well out of this. I would consider that fair payment for you doing all the scooping. You sit there, once the anomaly is complete, they move off to their next site and go to start shooting things there. You then quickly fly the Noctis through, and with 5 auto-salvagers, you scoop up all of the loot. So for the low slots here, I've gone for a medium micro warp drive just to get us a nice high speed to get into position, point at one end of the battlefield, and then fly a line through it. If you're interested to know what I mean by that, you'll see me do it in the auto-salvager lesson of the Catskull Academy. I've then gone for a standard Mark 9 cloaking device. This means once we're in that anomaly, once it's safe for us, we warp in, we activate that cloak, and we can sit there, which means any additional wave that spawns won't hit the Noctis. And if by some chance you do accidentally get decloaked or anything, then I've got a medium shield extender and a large shield booster. You'd pop the shield extender first, give yourself a bit of extra thing there, hopefully warp away to safety, or you can just boost yourself up whilst your friends get rid of whatever it is that's shooting at you. And the important point to note here, though, is if we have a look at these auto-salvagers, I'm only using dust auto-salvagers, because at 300, anywhere between 250 and 350 million ISK on the market, these are already expensive enough, thank you very much. Ultimately, you'll see that these, we've got an activation cost, 10 gigajoules is tiny, activation time now is 7.5 seconds, and the optimal range is all the way up at 22.5 kilometers. With 5 of these running, you are looting 5 ships every 7.5 seconds, and just, that is an incredibly quick way to clear a battlefield of loot. Even if you find that your cargo hold is filling up ridiculously quickly, by the time you warp back, dock up, offload everything, then warp back out, you are still going to be faster than someone who is manually looting in something like a Badger or a Wreath or something like that has been fully kitted out otherwise. I would still like to see that the cargo hold on the Noctis gets a buff, but for the most part, it's kind of okay. And you'll see that with this particular fit, we have a warp prep time of 14.31, which is pretty slow, but that's based on everything running, so it is slightly faster than that if you pre-align as well, and you can warp in, warp out nice and quickly that way. The second fit for the Noctis is what I refer to as the Vulture fit, and this can be considered a bit more of a troll fit. Some people will find this controversial, some people will love it, some people will absolutely hate it. Hey, I'm just here to talk about how this all works and showcase it for you folks, and talk about the right ways and the wrong ways to do this. Now, whereas the Locust is following around friends and looting with their permission, the Vulture swoops in and just picks the bones of things that the predators have already killed, with or without their consent. And that's what we're going to do here. You'll see that one of the 5 mid slots has swapped from a dust auto salvager to a narrow resonance scanner. Now, we don't have any scanning rigs on this particular ship. We'll talk about rigs in a moment because they haven't changed between the two. The scanning rigs aren't required here because we're going to go out to somewhere like Claralam or Clautala or Novokaikan or wherever, and we are just going to scan down other players, jump into their anomalies, and take their loot with or without their consent, depending. We'll talk about that in a moment. 196 meters on a scan radius is more than sufficient to scan down a battleship, a battle cruiser, or indeed most cruisers in the game, so you don't need to worry about scan rigs. You're not going for aggressive PvP here, we are in high sec for the most part, so you're not even going to be shot at when you do this, because they can't shoot at you. This means that we can swap out most of our tanking modules. You'll see here I have swapped the extender and the booster, both to Republic Fleet inertial stabilizers. This gives me a significantly faster align time here of 9.4 seconds, and that's before we activate them. Again, this means you can scan someone down, jump into their anomaly at range, make sure that the rats are all focused on them, and then once it's nice and safe, activate both those inertial stabilizers and the micro warp drive to zip at full speed right into the middle of their loot pile and just loot everything and then run off to safety. Now, in EVE Online, you will often find people in local offering to buy your salvage. They will basically say, look, if you're not going to loot, then I'll pay you 1,000,000 ISK or whatever, so that I can warp to you and I can loot for you. And I think that's the right way to do this, to offer to these people that, look, hey, do you mind if I just come and grab your loot? You're not going to take it. You're sitting at range in your Apocalypse Striker or your Raven Striker or whatever. You're not going to spend the time to go in and get this loot, which means if you fly off, it's going to be wasted. Could I come and loot it for you, and then we'll split the costs or whatever? There are different ways you can do that. On the other hand, if you did want to be a bit more troll-like about this, then yeah, you could just scan players down, warp in without their consent, grab everything, and run away. And some people are going to call me, some people are going to call a controversy on that. And I'm fine with this. I'm fine with this. I don't think NetEase should patch that out. I don't think there should be something like, that's my loot, you can't loot it. No, I think that people should be able to fly in and do this, and that's kind of the point of this. That's what we're getting at here, that if someone is sitting at range and not looting, then why not let someone else come in and get the loot? Oh, but they get my bounty ticks as well. And that brings to my next point when it comes to sort of the etiquette of doing this. If you're going to fly a Vulture and you fly in on someone's anomaly, just scoop the loot and get out. Don't hang around, scoop what's already there and then flee, because otherwise you're going to be impacting bounty ticks, and that's where it goes from being sort of a fun little steal their loot to being actually, you're really annoying me and chewing into my ISK making production. They weren't going to take the loot anyway. They probably were going to, they are trying to earn the ISK. So impact the thing that doesn't matter whilst not impacting the thing that does. Clean up after yourself, right? And that's what you're doing here as a salvager. You're going in to help clean up and tidy up, but don't steal. Don't sit there and just, sap off people's bounties. That's not cool. Now for both of these fits, the rigs are exactly the same. In both cases I've gone for full 3 cargo hold optimization 3s, that additional 60% cargo capacity there takes you up to about 10,000 cubic meters at full training. I'm still 1 point off having the expert industrial defense upgrade, which is the one that will give me the final 5% of the cargo hold, but I'm still just below 10,000 cubic meters, and that final 5% should top you up to the 10,000 cubic meter mark. On the other side, standard tank rigs, core defense field extender 3, alongside an anti-EM and anti-thermal screen reinforcer. Just in case something does shoot at you, you've got a bit more survivability there. But that's really all there is to this particular ship. That's it. You know, I think a lot of people have gone into the Noctis kind of hoping for a bit more, finding a new exciting way of making ISK, and it's just not. This is very much a fleet support vessel. It's either designed for you and your friends to work together in nullsec, or heck, even in highsec to come in there and just clean up battlefields. The Noctis is basically a sweeper. It's designed to collect the loot a lot faster than anyone else, and if you don't care about the loot, well, that's your choice. But if you're going to fly a Noctis, in addition to having all the skills for the Noctis itself, it is worthwhile, of course, having the reprocessing skills trained all the way up as well, because you're going to get a whole ton of loot, and not all of it is necessarily going to be useful stuff. That, for me, is what makes the Noctis really useful, that I can go out and I can get loot that I can turn into, like the Rex, I can turn into some of the rig materials. I go out and get blueprints in my Astero and my Stratios through exploration, and with those two combined, I've got rig manufacturing right the way up, I've got reprocessing right the way up, I sell most of the reprocessed loot for major ISK, and I use all of the scrap like bits of metal and that for rig construction with the blueprints that I found from exploration, and I sell those on the market, and that's what's giving me a decent ISK income at the moment. You can see, even with all this stuff that I've recently bought and fitted, 1.6 billion ISK has been made literally in the past 4 days. I think a couple of videos back you may have seen that down as low as 57 million, so it has gone right the way up. Anyway, folks, that's my thoughts and opinions regarding the Noctis. Maybe you have a particular use for this you think I've missed. Maybe you are doing some stuff with the Noctis that you think I could try out. Maybe you think it's scummy beyond all hell that I'm even suggesting that people could jump into your anomalies and steal your loot. At which point I would say, go Brawler. If you want your loot, go Brawler. Don't sit there at mad range and then complain that, you know, you're not looting and someone else has done the looting for you. But hey, either way, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, folks. Otherwise, happy sailing and see you in New Eden!